mob boss faints during dinner. His black waitress saves him. The next morning, his life changes. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a quiet evening at Morello's, one of the most exclusive Italian restaurants in the city. The chandeliers glimmered above, casting soft golden hues on the elegant white tablecloths and the polished mahogany of the bar. The staff moved swiftly and silently through the space, dressed in their crisp uniforms. Tonight was no different, or so it seemed, until the unexpected happened. At a table near the back, seated with a group of his most influential guests, was Dante Romano. Known as the mob boss of New York, his presence filled the room like a shadow that couldn't be ignored. A tall man with a sharp jawline, slick black hair, and dark, calculating eyes, Dante had the power to make or break anyone with just a word. His reputation was built on fear, loyalty, and control. As his guests laughed and sipped their wine, no one paid much attention to the small waitress moving from table to table. She was just another part of the restaurant, another face among the many who served the wealthy and powerful. But tonight, her life would change forever. Her name was Jasmine, a young woman of humble beginnings, but she had a fire in her heart that no one had ever bothered to see. Her dark skin, her slight frame, and her quiet demeanor often made her invisible to those around her, but she carried a strength within that no one could predict. As she approached table 7 with a bottle of wine, she noticed the usual air of coldness around Dante. But then something shifted. As she set the wine glass before him, he slumped in his chair, his face pale, his breathing shallow. The glass of wine slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. His body stiffened before he collapsed forward, hitting the table with a sickening thud. The guests around him froze, their laughter dying in an instant. Chaos erupted as people scrambled to help, but there was no one who truly knew how to react to the situation. Jasmine's heart raced as she saw the man, who commanded entire empires, now crumpled on the floor, helpless. Instinctively, she knelt beside him, placing a hand on his chest. His pulse was weak, and his skin was cold. She couldn't stand by and do nothing. Without thinking, she called out for help, but she knew there wasn't time to wait for the paramedics to arrive. Looking around, she saw the terror in the eyes of the other staff and the guests. They were all too afraid of what might happen next. But Jasmine knew she had to act. She had to save him. She pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. With a swift motion, she leaned over him, her hands shaking, but her mind clear. She knew what to do. She pressed her ear to his chest, feeling for his heartbeat, and with a deep breath, she began performing CPR. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. The room around her blurred. The sound of frantic whispers faded into the background, and all that mattered was the life she was trying to save. She pressed harder, her breath matching the rhythm of his pulse as she continued her efforts. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, Dante gasped, his chest rising as he took in a shallow breath. Jasmine didn't stop. She continued, her eyes focused on his face, hoping, praying for him to stay alive. And then, just as she was about to give up, he coughed, his body jerking upright as he took in a deep breath. He was alive. His eyes flickered open, but he couldn't quite comprehend what had just happened. The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Jasmine slowly pulled back, unsure of what to say or do. She had just saved the most powerful man in the city, and she had no idea what that would mean for her. Dante's gaze locked onto hers, and for the first time, there was no fear in his eyes, only something else, something she couldn't quite place. He blinked, his chest heaving with the effort of breathing. His voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. "Who are you?" he asked. Jasmine didn't answer right away. She was still trying to process the reality of the situation. She had been just a waitress, serving drinks and clearing plates moments ago. But now, her life was forever intertwined with the mob boss who had just come back from the brink of death. The questions in her mind swirled as she looked down at the man who had terrified so many, including her, but now depended on her for his very survival. What would happen now? What did this mean for her? And how would he repay her? I know that you all are still processing what just happened in the restaurant, but let me take you back to that moment. The room had fallen into an uneasy silence. Only the faint sound of heavy breathing from the mob boss and the soft shuffle of feet could be heard. Jasmine could feel the weight of everyone's gaze, their eyes on her, a mixture of shock and awe. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling from the rush of adrenaline that had coursed through her. She had just saved Dante Romano, a man who controlled the city, a man who had made more enemies than anyone could count, and yet, she had no idea what he would do next. Would he thank her? Would he fire her on the spot? Or worse, would he make her disappear for daring to act without his permission? His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, everything around them blurred. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice rough, still shaken by the ordeal. Jasmine stood still, unsure of how to respond. This was a man who had built his empire on fear, intimidation, and ruthlessness. What could she, a simple waitress, possibly say in this moment? "I did what anyone would have done," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. She had to keep herself grounded, had to remind herself that she was still just a worker in his world. Dante, however, didn't seem to be taking it that way. He straightened up in his chair, his sharp eyes scanning her face. "Anyone?" he asked, his tone low. "Most people would have panicked. You didn't." Jasmine swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of his words, the intensity behind them. But she didn't know how to respond. "You're different," Dante continued, his gaze softening, though the tension in his jaw remained. "I don't forget people who saved my life." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It felt surreal to Jasmine. How could she, of all people, be standing here with him, speaking to him like this? Was it just a momentary thing? Would he forget by tomorrow? "What's your name?" Dante asked, his voice more commanding now, though there was something almost gentle beneath it. "Jasmine," she replied, her voice a little steadier. "Jasmine, you've earned my respect tonight," Dante said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't give that to just anyone." There it was. Respect. A word she had never expected to hear from someone like him. She had spent her whole life fighting for recognition, fighting for respect in a world that often overlooked people like her. And now, this man, this mob boss, was telling her she had earned it. It was almost too much to take in. Jasmine didn't know what to say. She had never been good with words, especially not with someone like Dante Romano. I didn't do it for the recognition," she said, her hands still trembling slightly as she wiped them on her apron. Dante nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "I know," he said quietly, "but that doesn't change what you did." There was a pause, a moment of silence between them, and for the first time that evening, Jasmine felt as though the world around them had shifted. It wasn't just the fact that she had saved his life that mattered to him. It was the way she had acted, without fear, without hesitation. That was what had made the difference. "I'll make sure you're taken care of," Dante said after a beat, his voice steady. "Consider this your reward for what you did." Jasmine was taken aback. She had expected some kind of thank you, maybe a bonus, or at worst, a polite dismissal. But this was something else entirely. "Taken care of?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Dante leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You're a valuable person, Jasmine," he said, his voice lowering, almost as if sharing a secret. "And I don't take people like you for granted." He stood up, the chair scraping against the floor as he moved closer to her. His towering presence made her heart race, but she couldn't back down now. "I'm offering you a position," he continued, his voice calm, but carrying an edge that made her spine straighten. "Not just here. With me." Jasmine blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked, her mind racing. "I'll have you working directly for me. You'll be my personal assistant," Dante said, his voice carrying an unmistakable authority. "Your life will change, Jasmine, in ways you can't even imagine." Jasmine felt a cold rush run through her veins. This was a chance. No, more than that. This was an opportunity to leave behind everything she had ever known, to step into a world she had only ever seen from the outside. But it was also a dangerous world, a world full of shadows, power, and things she could never fully understand. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes," Dante replied, his tone gentle, almost coaxing, "and everything will change for you." She looked at him, the weight of his offer pressing down on her. The next morning, her life would never be the same. Was she ready to step into that world? To change her future forever? I know what you're all thinking, but let me take you further into this story. Jasmine stood there in stunned silence, still trying to process the words Dante had just spoken. He had offered her a position. A real position, working directly for him. It was more than she had ever dreamed of, but it was also more than she could possibly comprehend. She had never asked for this kind of attention. She had never thought that a simple act of kindness would lead to an opportunity like this. But here she was, standing in front of the most powerful man in New York, with her life about to change forever. You don't have to decide now, Dante said, his voice surprisingly gentle. But when you do, let me know. And be ready for the consequences, good or bad. Jasmine nodded, her mind racing with a million thoughts. She had always dreamed of a better life, one where she wasn't stuck cleaning tables in a restaurant. But could this really be her chance? She had seen what happened to people who got too close to men like him. She had seen their lives destroyed by the very power they thought they could control. But at the same time, she had never been offered a chance like this. As the night went on, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that her life was at a crossroads. She returned to her duties, her hands mechanically carrying out the motions of serving food and drinks, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she glanced at Dante, she felt a strange pull, like a magnet drawing her in. She had always known he was dangerous, but now, for the first time, she wondered if he saw something in her. Something more than just a waitress. The next morning, Jasmine woke to a new reality. She had agreed to meet with Dante's people. The offer had been real. She was now part of his world, whether she liked it or not. As she stood in front of the mirror, her mind raced. Was she making a mistake? Would she regret this decision? She dressed in the new clothes that had been delivered to her apartment, clothes she would never have been able to afford on her own, and stepped out of her small, modest apartment for the last time. Her entire life had been about survival. But now, it felt like she was stepping into something far beyond her understanding. When she arrived at the building where Dante's people waited for her, she was greeted by an imposing figure in a dark suit. His name was Luca, and he was one of Dante's most trusted bodyguards. He didn't say much, but his cold, calculating eyes spoke volumes. He led her through a set of heavy, ornate doors, down a hallway lined with expensive artwork and polished marble floors. As they reached the end of the hall, Luca stopped in front of a large wooden door and knocked once. A deep voice called out from within. Come in. Luca pushed open the door and motioned for Jasmine to enter. Inside, Dante sat behind a massive desk, his back to her. He turned slowly, his sharp gaze locking onto hers. You're here, he said, his voice calm but powerful. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had never seen Dante up close like this, with no one else around, no distractions. He was even more intimidating in person. She felt a cold sweat break out on her skin, but she forced herself to remain steady. I'm here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante nodded, his eyes scanning her carefully. I'm glad you decided to accept my offer, he said. But now you need to understand something. This world is not like the one you came from. There are rules here, and you'll have to follow them. If you can't handle that, then you're out. Jasmine swallowed hard. She had no idea what she had signed up for, but she wasn't going to back out now. I understand, she said firmly, though her hands trembled slightly. Dante stood up, walking around the desk toward her. His presence was overwhelming, but Jasmine refused to let her fear show. Good, Dante said. We start today. I need someone I can trust, someone who isn't afraid to do what's necessary. That's why I chose you. You're not like the others. Jasmine didn't know what he meant by that, but it sounded like a compliment. Or maybe it was a test. Either way, she wasn't about to question it. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. Dante smiled, a slow, knowing smile. You'll find out soon enough. Just remember, this is your chance. Don't waste it. As the days passed, Jasmine began to learn the ropes of Dante's world. It was a world of power, danger, and secrets. She found herself running errands, organizing meetings, and even dealing with situations that made her stomach turn. But through it all, she couldn't deny the strange connection she felt to Dante. He was powerful, yes, but he was also different. There was a vulnerability in him that she hadn't expected. She saw it in the moments when he let his guard down, when he wasn't the mob boss, but just a man with a complicated past. One night, After a particularly intense meeting, Jasmine found herself alone in the office with him. She had been organizing files when he entered, looking as if he had just come from a battlefield. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're doing well," Dante said finally, his voice low. "I've been watching you." Jasmine felt a flutter in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Dante stepped closer, his gaze intense. "I told you once that I don't forget people who save my life," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I also don't forget those who prove themselves worthy of my trust." Jasmine's heart raced. Was he talking about something more than just her work? Before she could respond, Dante turned and walked toward the window, staring out over the city. "You'll see. This life is full of surprises." The next morning, Jasmine knew something had shifted. Dante's attention was now on her in a way that was both professional and personal. She had earned his trust. But what did that mean for her? And how far was she willing to go in his world? "I know you've been wondering what happens next, so let's pick up right where we left off." Jasmine was still grappling with the intense changes in her life. The weight of Dante's offer was still fresh in her mind. Every day brought new surprises, and each one pushed her deeper into his world. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized just how much power he wielded, not only over the city, but now over her life. As the days passed, Jasmine began to realize something else. Dante's attention to her was more than just professional. There was a subtle shift, something that felt more personal, but it was hard to decipher. Was he just showing appreciation for her hard work, or was there something more? She wasn't sure if she should be worried, or if she should be flattered. Either way, it made her feel uneasy, like walking a fine line she wasn't sure she could cross. One evening, as Jasmine was finishing up some paperwork in the office, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. It was Dante. He paused in the doorway, his silhouette outlined against the light from the hallway. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to slow. "Jasmine," he said quietly, stepping into the room. She looked up from her work, surprised. "Yes, I need your help with something," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "What is it?" she asked, trying to sound composed, though she felt a nervous flutter in her chest. Dante walked over to her desk, his gaze steady. "There's something I need to take care of. Something delicate," he explained, his tone serious. Jasmine could sense that this was not just another task, not just another assignment. This was something bigger, something important. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her heart racing. Dante didn't immediately answer. Instead, he stared out the window, his expression hardening. After a moment, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "I need someone I can trust to handle this. It's a risk, Jasmine, but you've proven yourself to me." His words hit her like a punch to the stomach. He trusted her? The same man who ran an empire based on fear and respect was placing his trust in her? She couldn't believe it. "I can handle it," she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Dante turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I hope so," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Because if this goes wrong, it'll be more than just your job on the line." Jasmine swallowed hard. She had no idea what she was about to get into, but she knew one thing for sure. Backing out now wasn't an option. She had already stepped into his world, and there was no turning back. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Dante's gaze softened just for a moment, before he turned back to the window. "I know you won't," he said quietly. The next day, Jasmine found herself in a darkened alleyway, standing in front of an old, run-down building on the edge of the city. The cold wind nipped at her skin, but she barely noticed. Her mind was focused on the task at hand. She was here to meet someone who had information that could potentially change everything. As she waited in the shadows, her heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't help but feel like she was stepping deeper into a world she had no business being a part of. But Dante had given her this task. Dante trusted her. She couldn't fail him. A car pulled up beside her, its headlights blinding for a moment before it stopped. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, with a rough appearance that screamed danger. Jasmine couldn't see his face clearly, but she could tell he wasn't the type of man to be messed with. He approached her slowly, his eyes scanning her every move. "You're the one he sent?" the man asked, his voice gruff. "Yes," Jasmine replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm here for the information. The man studied her for a moment, then nodded. Follow me. They walked down a narrow hallway into a small, dimly lit room. Jasmine felt a shiver run down her spine as the door clicked shut behind her. This is it, the man said, pulling out a folder filled with documents. Everything you need to know. Jasmine took the folder from him, her fingers brushing against his. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the contents. Inside were details that would shake the very foundation of Dante's empire. Information about rivals, deals gone wrong, and threats that no one had ever suspected. What is this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man shrugged. It's what you need to know to keep the boss safe. Nothing more, nothing less. Jasmine nodded, feeling the weight of the folder in her hands. This was it, the turning point. She was now carrying the secrets of the city's most dangerous man. As she left the building, the cold air hit her like a slap in the face, but she didn't flinch. She was no longer just a waitress. She was part of the inner circle now, part of something much bigger than herself. And as she walked back to her car, she couldn't help but wonder, would this be the moment that changed everything for her? Or would it be the beginning of the end? I know you've been eagerly waiting to see what happens next. Let's dive right into it. Jasmine walked back to her car with the folder clutched tightly in her hands. Every step felt heavier than the last. The night air was cold, and as she stepped into the driver's seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to make a choice that would shape the rest of her life. She had just taken part in something dangerous, something no one from her world would ever understand. She was no longer just a waitress. She was part of something much bigger now, and that meant there was no going back. As she drove through the city, her mind raced. The documents in the folder contained enough information to shake the very foundations of Dante's empire. There were names of people who could bring him down, secrets that could destroy everything he had built. Jasmine wasn't sure what to do with it. She wasn't a part of his world in any real sense. She was just someone he had trusted with this. But was it really trust? Or was this just another test? She had no way of knowing. When she got back to Dante's penthouse, she was met with silence. It felt odd, like she had just stepped into a different world entirely. Dante was nowhere to be seen, and the place seemed emptier than usual. Jasmine walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing on the polished marble floors. As she passed his office door, she paused. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face him yet, but she couldn't just keep walking. She needed to talk to him. She knocked lightly on the door and waited. When there was no answer, she turned the handle and stepped inside. Dante was sitting at his desk, his back to her. He didn't look up when she entered. I've got it, she said, her voice steady, though her hands were trembling. He slowly turned in his chair to face her, his sharp gaze catching hers. You got it, he repeated. His eyes didn't soften, but there was a flicker of something, curiosity, maybe. I have the information. It's all in here, Jasmine said, holding up the folder. Dante stood up, walking toward her. He took the folder from her hands, his fingers brushing against hers. She felt a jolt of electricity at the contact. For a moment, they stood there, just looking at each other. He didn't say anything, but the tension in the room was thick. Did you read it? He asked, his voice low. Jasmine hesitated. I skimmed through some of it, she admitted. But I don't know what to do with it. Dante nodded slowly. You did the right thing by bringing it to me. Now, I'll take care of it. Jasmine felt a small sense of relief wash over her. She hadn't expected him to be so calm about it. She thought he might be angry, or worse, disappointed. But his cool demeanor made her question if this was all part of a bigger plan. And what about me? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Dante raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? What happens to me now? She clarified. Am I just part of the plan too? He studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke. You've already proven your worth, Jasmine. You're not just a part of the plan. You're an asset now. The word hung in the air, its weight settling heavily on her chest. She didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified. An asset? She repeated, unsure of how to process it. Dante smiled, but it wasn't the warm kind of smile she was used to seeing. It was colder, more calculating. Yes, and in this world, assets are valuable, but they're also expendable. Jasmine's stomach twisted. Expendable? She echoed. Dante's smile faded. I'm not saying I would ever discard you. But you need to understand the world you're in now. It's not about loyalty or affection. It's about power. And if you want to keep that power, you have to be ready to do whatever it takes. He took a step closer, his presence looming over her. That's why I need to know if you're with me, Jasmine. Completely. If you are, then I can protect you. If not, you're on your own. His words hung in the air like a challenge. Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She had never been asked to make a decision like this before. She had always been in survival mode, just trying to get by. But now, her choices were much more complicated. She had to decide where her loyalties lay, and more importantly, what kind of person she wanted to be. I'm with you, she said, the words coming out more easily than she thought they would. Dante's eyes softened slightly. Good, he said, his voice carrying a hint of approval. But remember, Jasmine, this isn't a game. You'll need to be ruthless. You'll need to be someone who can make the hard choices. If you're not ready for that, then walk away now. It's the only warning I'll give you. Jasmine stood there, feeling the weight of his words. Was she ready for this world? Could she really become someone who played by these rules? She wasn't sure. But as she looked into Dante's eyes, she realized something. She was already too deep into his world to turn back. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to embrace the power she had always been afraid of. The next morning, she would be a different person, one who walked in the shadows of power and fear. And the choices she made would shape not only her future, but Dante's as well. I know you've been waiting for the next chapter, so let's continue. The days that followed were a blur for Jasmine. Dante's words echoed in her mind every time she stepped into his office, every time she saw him across the room. He had given her a chance, but now she had to prove herself in ways she had never imagined. She had accepted his offer, and now there was no going back. The world she had entered was dangerous, full of secrets and decisions that could break anyone who wasn't careful. But something inside her told her that this was the only chance she'd ever get to change her life. The moment she stepped into Dante's world, she knew it would change her forever. It wasn't just the money, the power, or the luxury that made her want to stay. It was the way Dante saw her, the way he seemed to value her in a way that no one ever had before. Jasmine had spent her life being overlooked, ignored, and underestimated. But now, with Dante, she had a purpose. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who mattered. The first test came when Dante sent her to handle a sensitive issue involving one of his business partners. It was a task that no one else wanted to take on, and she was the one he trusted to get it done. She was nervous, of course, but she knew she couldn't show weakness. If she did, she would lose everything. She arrived at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where the business partner had arranged to meet her. The place was dark and abandoned, with only a few cars parked outside. Jasmine's heart raced as she walked toward the entrance, her mind running through all the possible scenarios. What if something went wrong? What if she wasn't prepared? But she had no time to think about that now. She had to be strong. As she entered the warehouse, she was met by a man who looked like he had stepped out of a gangster movie. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a suit that screamed power. He didn't smile when he saw her, just gave her a cold, appraising look. You must be the one Dante sent, the man said, his voice low and rough. Jasmine nodded, keeping her posture straight. I'm here to handle the situation, she said, her voice steady despite the nerves gnawing at her. The man raised an eyebrow. And what exactly are you going to do about it? Jasmine didn't flinch. I'm here to make sure it's resolved, she said. Dante trusts me to get it done. The man didn't seem impressed, but he didn't argue. He led her deeper into the warehouse, where a few more men were waiting. They didn't seem too happy to see her, and Jasmine could feel the tension in the air. She had to remind herself why she was here. She wasn't just some girl from the streets anymore. She was Dante's right hand now. She had earned this place, and she would prove it. After a few moments of tense silence, the deal was struck. The business partner agreed to Dante's terms, and Jasmine was able to get everything in writing. It wasn't easy, but she had done it. She was about to leave when one of the men stepped forward, blocking her way. You think you're important now, huh? He sneered. You think you're part of the family? Jasmine's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't show it. I am part of the family, she said firmly, and I'm not going anywhere. The man smirked, but didn't say anything else. Jasmine turned and walked away, her head held high. She had just completed her first real mission. The feeling of accomplishment washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by the realization of how much danger she had just put herself in. She wasn't just playing in the shadows anymore. She was part of the game. As she returned to the penthouse, Dante was waiting for her. His dark eyes locked onto hers as she entered the room. "You handled it well," he said, his voice soft but firm. Jasmine couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. "It wasn't easy, but I did it." Dante nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. "You've earned my respect, Jasmine. But don't get comfortable. There's more to come." Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. She had known this was just the beginning. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and there was no way out. But in that moment, as Dante looked at her, she knew one thing for certain. She was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, Jasmine woke up to a world that was both familiar and foreign. She had always dreamed of a life beyond the small apartment and the dead-end jobs. But now that she was living it, she realized how much more complicated it was than she had ever imagined. Dante had opened the door to a world of power, danger, and manipulation, and she had walked right through it. There was no going back now. She had crossed the line, and the choices she made from here on out would define who she was. Would she survive in this world, or would it break her? Jasmine didn't know the answer, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. "I know you're still wondering how this all unfolds, so let's continue." After her first real test, Jasmine felt the weight of the decision she had made. She was part of something much bigger now, something she couldn't back away from. The danger, the responsibility, it was all coming at her fast, and it was a reality she could no longer ignore. But she wasn't backing down. Every move she made was more calculated, more deliberate. The next few days were a whirlwind of tasks, meetings, and decisions. Dante had made it clear that this was only the beginning. His trust in her was now a constant reminder of the path she had chosen, and the stakes were getting higher. Jasmine's first real taste of the power dynamics came when Dante sent her to a high-stakes meeting with a rival family. It wasn't just business, it was a message, a way of showing the rival family that they weren't to be underestimated. She arrived at a sleek, high-rise building downtown. The glass windows gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the lobby was filled with polished marble floors and chrome fixtures. Everything screamed wealth and power. She stepped into the elevator, her heart racing. Dante's words echoed in her mind. "Stay calm. Keep your cool. This is more than just a meeting, it's about dominance." As the elevator ascended to the top floor, Jasmine wiped her palms on her dress. She had never felt this out of place in her life. She had always been on the outside looking in, and now she was right in the middle of it all, standing on the edge of something bigger than herself. The doors opened, and she stepped out into the private conference room, where several men were already seated. The tension in the room was thick, and Jasmine could feel every eye on her as she walked to the head of the table. The leader of the rival family, a man named Vincent, stood up to greet her. His presence was intimidating, but Jasmine held her ground. She was here to represent Dante, and she wasn't about to show fear. "Jasmine, right?" Vincent's voice was smooth, almost patronizing. "I must say, I'm surprised Dante trusted a woman to handle this." Jasmine forced a smile, taking her seat. "Dante trusts me," she replied, her voice steady. "And that's all that matters." Vincent studied her for a moment, his eyes calculating. "We'll see about that." The meeting began, and Jasmine quickly learned that power wasn't just about making deals. It was about asserting control, about proving you were the one who could walk away with what you wanted. Every word spoken, every gesture made, was a carefully calculated move in a high-stakes game of chess. The conversation drifted from topic to topic: business dealings, territory disputes, and unspoken threats. Jasmine listened carefully, picking up on the subtle cues and underlying tension in the room. The stakes were high, and the silence was deafening at times, broken only by the occasional exchange of words meant to test boundaries. She knew this was her chance to prove herself. She couldn't afford to mess this up. As the meeting continued, Vincent made a pointed comment about Dante's growing influence, hinting at a challenge. That's when Jasmine spoke up, her voice cutting through the silence. "Dante doesn't just grow his influence, he secures it," she said, her words firm and unwavering. "And if anyone tries to challenge him, they'll find themselves regretting it." Vincent's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, a sly smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We'll see, won't we?" he replied, leaning back in his chair. Jasmine knew that wasn't just an idle threat. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the meeting concluded, she stood up and shook Vincent's hand, her composure never wavering. The tension was still thick, but the message had been sent. Dante's influence would not be challenged easily. Jasmine walked out of the building with a sense of accomplishment, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of what she had just walked into. She was now fully entrenched in this world, and she could feel it. The danger, the expectations, the constant scrutiny. As she made her way back to Dante's penthouse, she couldn't help but wonder if she was truly ready for what was to come. The power, the risks, the alliances, everything was changing, and there was no turning back. Dante was waiting for her when she returned. "Well done," he said, his voice calm, though there was a flicker of approval in his eyes. "You handled yourself well." Jasmine nodded, but she wasn't sure how to respond. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. Dante's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You're a part of this now, Jasmine. You need to keep proving yourself. And remember, this world is not forgiving." Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine at his words. She had known it wasn't going to be easy, but now, more than ever, she understood just how deep she was in. As the days passed, Jasmine's role grew more important. She was no longer just a witness to the power struggles around her. She was a player in the game. Every day brought new challenges, new decisions that could make or break everything. And with each passing day, she realized something else. She wasn't just part of the game. She was becoming the game. There was no way out, no safe place. It was just her and Dante now, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. "I know you've been waiting for what happens next, so let's dive right in." The days that followed her confrontation at the meeting with Vincent were a blur for Jasmine. She was becoming more immersed in Dante's world with every passing hour, and the weight of her decisions was starting to feel heavier. Her every move was being watched. Every step she took, every word she said, there was no room for error. But despite the pressure, there was something exhilarating about it. She was no longer just a pawn. She was becoming a key player, someone Dante trusted. That trust was something she could never take for granted. The phone rang. Late one evening, a few days after the meeting with Vincent. It was Dante. "I need you to come to the penthouse." "We have a problem," he said, his voice as calm as ever, but there was an edge to it. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. A problem? What could it be? She had barely sat down at the kitchen table, just starting to wind down from her day, but now she had to leave everything behind. She grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, her mind racing. Dante's penthouse wasn't far from her apartment, and as she made her way there, she couldn't stop wondering what kind of problem he was talking about. What had gone wrong? She couldn't think of a single issue that would require her to be involved, but that was the nature of Dante's world. Problems could pop up at any moment, and when they did, they often needed immediate action. When she arrived, Dante was waiting for her in the living room. The penthouse was darker than usual, the only light coming from the city skyline through the windows. The atmosphere felt tense. He was standing by the window, his back to her, his posture rigid. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cautious. Dante turned slowly to face her, his expression unreadable. "We have a situation with one of our own," he said, his voice steady. Jasmine's stomach tightened. "One of our own?" she repeated. Dante nodded. "A member of the family has stepped out of line, and it's going to cost us if we don't handle it properly." Jasmine felt a chill run through her. She knew what that meant. Dante wasn't just talking about a business deal gone wrong or a minor mistake. No, this was much bigger. Someone had crossed a line, and that meant consequences. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Dante walked toward her, his gaze intense. "I need you to go to the meeting tomorrow. You'll be there as my representative." Jasmine froze. "A meeting? With who?" Dante's lips twitched, a shadow of a smile playing on his face. "With someone who needs to learn the cost of betraying me." Jasmine nodded slowly, processing his words. Understood. The next day, she found herself standing in front of a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a stark contrast to the polished luxury of Dante's penthouse, the kind of place that made her feel like an outsider. The streets were empty, the air cold, and the silence felt oppressive. This was the kind of place where deals were made in the dark, where everything was about power and control. She took a deep breath and walked inside. The man she was supposed to meet was already there, standing by a table stacked with papers and files. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. Jasmine didn't need to ask who he was. She knew. He was one of Dante's enemies, someone who had crossed him and now had to pay the price. She approached him, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. He looked up as she walked toward him, his eyes narrowing as if trying to size her up. "You must be Dante's girl," he said, his voice gruff. Jasmine didn't flinch. She wasn't Dante's girl. She was more than that. She was his trusted representative. She stepped closer, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I'm here to make sure you understand the situation," she said, her voice calm but firm. The man scoffed. "And what situation would that be?" he sneered. Jasmine took a moment to assess him. "You've made a mistake," she said, her tone unwavering. "And now, you're going to fix it." The man laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "I don't take orders from anyone, especially not from someone like you." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. "You will now," she said. The words hung in the air, heavy with the promise of what was to come. The man's expression darkened. He knew he had crossed a line, and now, it was time to face the consequences. The conversation that followed was filled with threats, power plays, and subtle manipulations. But Jasmine stayed calm, steady in her resolve. She had learned from Dante that power wasn't just about brute force. It was about control, patience, and knowing when to act. After what felt like hours, the man finally caved, agreeing to the terms Dante had set. He understood the cost of betraying Dante now. As Jasmine walked out of the warehouse, she felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She had handled herself well, but she also knew something had shifted in her. She was no longer just an observer. In this world, she was a part of it, for better or worse. And she would have to keep proving herself, every day. When she returned to Dante's penthouse, he was waiting for her. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He knew she had done her job. "Well done," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "You've proven yourself again." Jasmine nodded, but inside, she knew the truth. She wasn't just proving herself to Dante anymore. She was proving herself to herself. The world she had stepped into wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about dominance, control, and making the hard choices. And for the first time, Jasmine felt ready to make those choices. She wasn't just playing the game anymore. She was in charge of her own destiny. "I know you're eager to see how this unfolds, so let's dive in." Jasmine's life had changed in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Every day brought a new test, a new challenge. But with each trial, she grew stronger, more confident. Her role in Dante's world was no longer something she could question. It was her reality now. And as much as she had feared this moment, a part of her couldn't help but embrace it. The weight of it, the danger, the power, it all became a part of who she was. It was the morning after her successful meeting with Dante's rival, Vincent, when Jasmine received a call that would change everything. She had just finished her morning routine, the apartment still quiet, the city outside bustling with life. As she prepared a quick breakfast, her phone rang. It was Dante. She could hear the familiar cold edge in his voice. "I need you to meet someone," he said, his tone sharp. "Where?" Jasmine asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. "At the warehouse on 5th Street. It's urgent. Don't be late." The line went dead before she could respond. She had no idea who she was supposed to meet, but it was clear that it wasn't a routine job. Dante's urgent meant something serious, something she couldn't afford to be unprepared for. As she drove through the city, her heart raced. What was it this time? A deal? A threat? Another power move? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing. She had to prove herself again. She had already crossed several lines, but each step only led her further down a path she couldn't turn back from. The warehouse was located on a quieter stretch of 5th Street, far from the busy heart of the city. The building itself was nondescript, just another aging structure in a row of industrial buildings. The large metal doors were shut tight, but Jasmine knew exactly where to go. She parked her car and approached the side entrance, the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement. As she approached the door, it opened before she could knock. A figure stepped out of the shadows, and for a moment, Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. It was Luca, one of Dante's most trusted men, his eyes as sharp and calculating as ever. "You're late," he said, his voice low. "I'm here now." Jasmine replied, her tone steady. Luca nodded and stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of dust and metal. She could hear voices in the distance, muffled by the walls. As she followed Luca deeper into the building, she began to feel the familiar sense of unease. There was something about this meeting that didn't sit right with her. When they reached the center of the warehouse, the voices grew clearer. Jasmine stepped into the open space and saw a man standing with his back to her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing that made him look like someone who belonged in the shadows. He turned when he heard them approach. "Jasmine," he said, his voice deep, almost mocking. "I've been expecting you." Jasmine froze. The man was familiar, but she couldn't place where she had seen him before. His cold, piercing eyes met hers, and she felt a chill run through her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. The man smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was cold, calculating, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "I think you know who I am," he said, his smile widening. "I'm the one who's going to make sure you understand exactly what Dante's world is really about." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a warning, a test. Jasmine's mind raced. She had no idea what the man was talking about, but she could tell he was no ally of Dante. He was here for a reason, and it was clear that it wasn't a good one. "I'm not afraid of you," Jasmine said, her voice sharp. The man laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. "You should be," he said. "You think you understand power? You think you're in control? I can show you just how quickly everything can fall apart." His words were a challenge, and Jasmine could feel the weight of them. She wasn't just dealing with a rival. She was dealing with someone who wanted to break her. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've crossed a line by coming here," he said. "And now, you'll pay the price." Jasmine didn't flinch. She had faced worse. She had been trained by Dante to deal with threats, to stand her ground when it mattered most. But this was different. This wasn't a business deal or a power play. This was personal. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice low but firm. The man smirked. "I want you to understand that no one is untouchable. Not even Dante." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jasmine could feel the tension building, her pulse quickening. She knew she had to act fast, or this meeting would go south very quickly. Without warning, she reached for the gun hidden in her coat. She had learned how to handle herself, how to stay calm under pressure. The man's smirk faltered as he saw her move, but he didn't back down. "You're brave," he said, his voice cold. "But bravery won't save you here." Jasmine's finger tightened on the trigger, but she didn't fire. She was waiting for the right moment, waiting to see if he would make the first move. A beat of silence passed between them. And then, suddenly, the tension broke. The door to the warehouse slammed open, and several of Dante's men burst in, guns drawn. The man turned, his expression faltering for just a moment. "I told you," Jasmine said, her voice steady as ever. "No one is untouchable." Dante's men quickly subdued the man, dragging him away, and as the chaos subsided, Jasmine stood there, her heart still racing. Dante had set her up, and she had passed the test. But there was no relief in the moment. She knew that this was only the beginning. In Dante's world, trust was a dangerous thing. And now, she had learned just how much danger she was truly in. "I know you've been waiting for what happens next. So let's continue." The days following the warehouse confrontation were tense. Jasmine had proven herself to be more than capable, but the deeper she got into Dante's world, the more she realized that she was constantly walking on a tightrope. One misstep, and everything could come crashing down. The man who had been taken from the warehouse had been silenced, but Jasmine knew that wasn't the end of it. Dante's empire was built on control and loyalty, but also on fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of the unknown, and fear of losing power. Dante's power was absolute, but Jasmine had learned that no one, not even him, was immune to the consequences of their choices. As the days went by, Jasmine worked harder to gain Dante's trust, proving that she wasn't just a piece in his game. She was a vital part of his operation. Every move she made was calculated, every word she spoke was measured. But despite the control she had over her role, there was something about Dante that always kept her on edge. It was the way he observed her, the way he seemed to always be watching, waiting for her to slip up. And sometimes, just sometimes, She felt as though there was more to him than the ruthless mob boss she had come to know. One evening, after finishing a particularly exhausting meeting with one of Dante's associates, Jasmine found herself alone in his office. The room was dimly lit, with the city lights casting long shadows across the floor. Dante was sitting at his desk, papers scattered in front of him, a glass of whiskey in hand. His posture was relaxed, but there was a tension in the air that she couldn't ignore. Jasmine hesitated before approaching. She had come to understand that in Dante's world, the unexpected was always lurking around the corner. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice steady but unsure. Dante looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, there was silence between them, a silence that felt heavy with unspoken words. "Yes," he said, his voice low. "I wanted to talk to you." Jasmine took a deep breath. She had learned to read Dante, to understand the subtle shifts in his mood, and right now, she could sense that this conversation would be different from the others. "About what?" she asked cautiously. Dante leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the rim of his glass. "About you," he said simply. Jasmine felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Was this it? Was he about to push her out of his inner circle? Had she done something wrong? "What about me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dante's eyes softened slightly, though the intensity was still there. "I've been watching you, Jasmine," he said, "and I've seen something in you. Something I didn't expect." Jasmine's heart raced. Was this a compliment? A warning? She couldn't tell. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante set his glass down on the desk and stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. "You've proven yourself time and time again," he said, stepping closer to her. "You've shown that you're not afraid to make the tough decisions. You're smart. You're capable." Jasmine could feel the weight of his words, but there was something in the way he said them that made her uneasy. It wasn't just praise. It was something else. "And?" she prompted, not sure where this was going. Dante's gaze never wavered. "And I think you're ready for more," he said. "I want you to take on more responsibility, more control. I need someone I can trust, and you've earned that." Jasmine's mind raced. This was the moment she had been working toward. She had fought for her place in Dante's world, and now he was offering her more. But the question lingered in the back of her mind. What did it really mean to be in control? What would she have to sacrifice to gain it? "What kind of responsibility?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. Dante didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. For a moment, he was silent, lost in thought. Then he turned back to her. "I need someone to help manage certain operations," he said, his voice low and serious. "I trust you to handle the more delicate matters." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Delicate matters. That could mean anything. She had already done things that pushed her limits, but this felt different. This felt like the point of no return. "What kind of operations?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Dante walked back toward her, his steps slow and measured. "You'll be handling people, Jasmine, making sure things go according to plan. You'll be working with people who are loyal to me, but you'll also have to deal with those who aren't." The weight of his words hit her hard. This wasn't just about making decisions or proving her loyalty anymore. This was about controlling others, manipulating situations, and managing the power struggles that came with running an empire. Jasmine wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of responsibility, but she didn't have a choice. She had come this far. "I can do it," she said, the words leaving her mouth before she had fully processed them. Dante studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. "Good," he said, his voice calm. "Because this is where things get real. You'll need to be ruthless, and you'll need to be smart. But if you want to stay on top, you have to be willing to make the hard choices." Jasmine nodded. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this new chapter, but one thing was certain. She was in it now. There was no turning back. Dante had given her a new role, and with it, a new set of challenges. And she was going to face them head-on, no matter the cost. "I know you've been waiting to see how things unfold, so let's dive right into the next chapter." Jasmine was no longer just an observer in Dante's world. She was fully integrated into it. Every day, every move she made was a test. She had been promoted, given more responsibility, and with it came more risks. She knew the consequences of failure now. Her every action was scrutinized, her decisions watched. But as she settled into her new role, a part of her began to wonder. Was she becoming someone she could no longer recognize? The pressure was mounting. Every day she was required to prove herself, not just to Dante, but to the empire he had built. And with each new task came a reminder that in this world, power was never guaranteed. You had to fight for it, hold on to it with everything you had. The first major test came when one of Dante's rivals, a family with a long history of bad blood with him, decided to make their move. The tension was palpable, and Jasmine knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary power play. This was something bigger. A meeting was called, and Jasmine was instructed to represent Dante. She felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. She had handled minor negotiations before, but this was different. This was the moment that could define her place in the family. She arrived at the designated location, an old, industrial building near the docks. The air was thick with tension as she entered. This was a place where deals were made in shadows, where alliances shifted like the tides. She stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the concrete floor, and was immediately greeted by a cold, calculating gaze. It was one of the rival family's men. He was tall, with a cold demeanor that matched the place they were in. "You must be the one Dante sent," he said, his voice low and dismissive. Jasmine didn't flinch. "I'm here to handle the situation," she replied firmly. She wasn't about to show weakness. The man raised an eyebrow. "Handle it? And you think you can?" he asked, his smirk mocking her. Jasmine's gaze never wavered. "Dante trusts me," she said, her voice steady. "That's all you need to know." The man chuckled darkly, clearly unimpressed. "Dante's trust won't save you here," he said, stepping closer. But Jasmine wasn't intimidated. She had learned from Dante to never back down, to stand her ground no matter how the odds stacked against her. She was no longer just a servant in this world. She was a key player. They walked through the building, following the man into a small, dimly lit room. Inside were several more members of the rival family, all seated around a long table. There was an undeniable tension in the air. Jasmine could feel it, the weight of the room pressing down on her. She was the only one who wasn't part of their world, and she could sense their judgment. But she didn't care. This was her moment. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. The man she had been following motioned for her to sit. "This is about power," he said simply. "Dante's time is over. We're here to take what's ours." Jasmine held her gaze, not showing any signs of fear. She knew exactly what they were trying to do. They weren't just threatening Dante's position. They were threatening everything he had built. And if they succeeded, they would tear down everything she had worked for. "Dante isn't someone you can just push aside," she said, her voice unwavering. The men around the table exchanged glances, some with amusement, others with impatience. "You don't understand," one of them said, leaning forward. "This city belongs to us now. Dante's rule is over, and so is yours." The tension in the room was thick, like a powder keg waiting to explode. But Jasmine stayed calm. She wasn't going to let them push her around. "Dante has always been one step ahead of you," she said, her eyes narrowing. "And he always will be. You've made a mistake by underestimating him." The man across from her sneered. "And you think you're going to stop us? You're just a woman. You don't belong here." Jasmine's blood ran cold, but she didn't let it show. "I'm not just a woman. I'm Dante's representative," she said, her voice low and fierce. "And that means I'm in control of this situation, not you." The room went silent. The men around the table didn't know how to respond. They had expected fear, submission, or at least some kind of hesitation. But they didn't get that from Jasmine. She stood her ground, her resolve unshaken. "So here's what's going to happen," Jasmine continued. "You're going to walk out of this building, and you're going to let Dante continue his work. Or we'll have a problem." The rival family members were speechless. They had never been spoken to this way, especially not by someone like her. But Jasmine wasn't done. "If you think for 1 second that you can come into Dante's world and tear it down without consequences, you're wrong," she said, her voice sharp. "You've made your move. Now it's time to pay the price." The silence in the room stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, one of the men stood up, his face flushed with rage. "You think you can intimidate us?" he spat. "You're out of your league, girl." But Jasmine didn't flinch. "You're the ones who are out of your league," she said coolly. "And now, it's time for you to learn that lesson the hard way." The men hesitated, and for the first time, Jasmine saw uncertainty in their eyes. They knew that they had underestimated her. and they knew that Dante's empire was not something that could be easily torn down. One by one, they began to back off, realizing that this was a battle they could not win. As they retreated, Jasmine felt a surge of triumph. She had done it. She had proven herself again. She wasn't just a woman in a man's world. She was a force to be reckoned with. When she returned to Dante, she knew that things had changed. She wasn't just playing the game anymore. She was in control of it. And no one was going to take that away from her. I know you've been waiting to see how this all comes together. So let's pick up where we left off. Jasmine had successfully secured her place in Dante's empire, but with every victory came a new set of challenges. She had proven herself in the field, handled delicate situations with precision, and gained Dante's respect. But that was just the beginning. The world she had entered wasn't just about power. It was about survival. And in this world, the line between loyalty and betrayal was thin, sometimes almost invisible. After the confrontation with Dante's rival family, Jasmine knew that things had shifted. Dante had watched her handle the situation, and while he had been impressed, there was something about his eyes that told her it wasn't enough. You did well, he had told her, but his tone had carried a weight that suggested he was still waiting for something more. Jasmine knew she had earned his trust, but trust alone wasn't enough in his world. Power wasn't just given, it was claimed. And it wasn't just about making the right decisions. It was about making the decisions that kept you on top. As she sat in her office, reflecting on the events of the last few days, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that another test was coming. Dante had kept her close, but there were still many layers of his world that she hadn't fully seen. One evening, as the sun began to set, she received a call from Dante. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable urgency in it. I need you at the meeting spot, he said. It's time. Time for what? Jasmine didn't know, but she didn't question him. She grabbed her coat, her mind already running through possible scenarios. When she arrived at the location, a luxurious yet discreet hotel suite on the edge of town, she was greeted by one of Dante's associates, a man she had seen a few times but never interacted with directly. He's waiting for you, the man said, his tone neutral. Jasmine nodded, trying to mask the rising tension inside her. She wasn't sure what this meeting was about, but she knew it was important. Dante's people never acted without reason. Inside the suite, Dante stood by the window, his back to her. The city lights flickered below, casting a glow across his figure. It was a moment of calm before the storm, a quiet before the chaos that often followed Dante's moves. You're here, he said without turning around. I've been expecting you. Jasmine walked toward him, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. What's going on? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dante turned slowly, his gaze fixed on her. It's time for you to take the next step, he said, his voice low but filled with meaning. You've done everything I've asked, and now I need you to handle something more permanent. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Permanent? What do you mean? She asked, trying to mask the concern creeping into her voice. Dante's expression hardened. There's a traitor in the family, he said. Someone who has been working against us, betraying us from within. Jasmine felt a chill run through her. She had never seen Dante this serious before. Who? She asked, her mind racing. Dante's eyes narrowed. Someone who has been feeding information to our enemies. I've known about it for a while, but now I need it dealt with. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. And you want me to handle it? Dante nodded, his gaze unwavering. I trust you, he said simply. You've proven yourself time and time again. You're the only one I can trust to do this right. Jasmine didn't respond immediately. The weight of his words pressed down on her. She had always known that in Dante's world, loyalty was everything. But this was different. This was about life and death. She had taken on responsibilities before, but never anything this personal. Who is it? She asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante took a deep breath, his gaze still locked on hers. It's someone close. Someone you've worked with. Someone you trust. The words hit her like a slap to the face. Someone she trusted? Who? She asked again, her heart pounding. Dante's lips curled into a grim smile. It's Luca. The name hit her like a punch in the gut. Luca had been with Dante for years, one of his most trusted men. They had worked together on countless jobs. He had always been loyal. Or so she thought. Luca? She repeated, barely able to believe it. He's been betraying us all along, Dante said, his voice cold. I can't have someone like that in my organization. He's a liability, and I need you to take care of it. Jasmine stood frozen, the weight of the task before her almost unbearable. Luca was not just an associate. He had been a part of Dante's inner circle for years. And now, she had to make the decision that would either solidify her place in Dante's world or destroy everything she had worked for. I can't just kill him, Jasmine said, her voice trembling. Dante's eyes softened slightly, but the coldness remained. It's not about killing him, he said. It's about making sure he never betrays us again. You'll handle it the way you see fit. But I trust you to make the right decision. The room fell silent as Jasmine stood there, the weight of the choice pressing down on her. She had earned her place in Dante's world, but this was something different. This wasn't just about business. It was about loyalty, trust, and survival. And the choice she made would determine not only her future, but also her place in Dante's empire. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, she would face Luca, and she would make sure that Dante's world stayed intact, no matter the cost. I know you've been waiting for the resolution of Jasmine's journey, and it's time to bring it all together. The night before the meeting with Luca, Jasmine couldn't sleep. The weight of what was to come pressed heavily on her. Dante's trust in her had been earned over time, but now she was faced with the hardest decision she had ever made. The betrayal by Luca, someone she had worked alongside, someone who had been part of the very foundation of Dante's empire, felt like a punch to the gut. But in this world, weakness couldn't be shown. Loyalty and trust were everything, and she couldn't let a betrayal go unanswered. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of ending someone's life, especially someone who had been part of the family, filled her with doubt. The cold reality of Dante's world was closing in on her. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The next morning, she dressed in silence, her mind still racing with the decision she was about to make. She arrived at the meeting point, a secluded area at the edge of the city, the same place where Dante had handled his most sensitive operations. The air was thick with tension, the city's noise faint in the distance, drowned out by the gravity of the moment. Luca was already there, his tall figure standing near an old car, the usual coldness in his eyes replaced by something different, something Jasmine couldn't place. "You're late," Luca said, his voice hard but with a hint of something like remorse. Or was it regret? Jasmine's pulse quickened. She could see the man she had known, the man who had been loyal to Dante for so long, now standing before her as the enemy. But she couldn't let emotion cloud her judgment. "I'm here now," Jasmine replied, her voice steady, her eyes locked with his. He didn't answer, but the silence between them spoke volumes. Jasmine knew the moment she entered Dante's world that there would be times when she would have to make decisions that would break her. But this felt different. Luca had been family, or so she thought. "You've been working against Dante," she said, her voice unwavering. "I can't let you continue." Luca didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. "I never wanted it to come to this," he said quietly. "But you don't understand. Dante, he's changed. We all have our limits. And I've reached mine." Jasmine's heart twisted. She had thought the same way. She had always justified her actions in Dante's world, thinking that everything she did was to survive, to protect herself. But Luca's words hit her harder than she expected. "I understand," Jasmine said softly. "I really do." She took a step closer, her hand resting on the gun hidden beneath her coat. She didn't want to pull the trigger. She didn't want to do this. But if she hesitated, if she showed any doubt, she would be the one who paid the price. This was the reality of the world she had chosen. And now, it was too late to turn back. "I'm sorry, Luca," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Luca didn't say anything, but his eyes softened just for a moment. In that brief moment, Jasmine saw a flicker of the man she had once trusted. But she couldn't afford to remember that now. She had to finish what she had started. The sound of the gunshot rang out, sharp and final, echoing in the quiet space around them. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Luca fell to the ground, his expression frozen in shock. Jasmine's hands shook as she lowered the gun, her heart racing. She had done it. She had made the decision, and it was over. But the weight of it all, the finality of it, hit her hard. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Luca was gone, and there was no coming back from that. Jasmine stood there, staring at the body in front of her, the coldness of the world around her seeping into her bones. She had killed him, and there would be no forgiveness. There would be no redemption. Dante's empire had been secured, but at what cost? The man she had trusted, the man she had worked alongside, was gone. And now, there was nothing left but the emptiness of the decision she had made. She had completed the task. She had followed through. And yet, the victory felt hollow. When she returned to Dante, there was no celebration, no congratulations. He didn't need to say anything. His gaze told her everything. She had done what needed to be done. And now, there was no turning back. You did well, Dante said, his voice as cold as ever. But remember, this is just the beginning. Jasmine nodded, though the words felt like a heavy weight on her chest. She had taken another step in Dante's world, but with each step, the person she once was seemed to slip further away. In this world, there was no room for weakness. And now, Jasmine was fully part of it, for better or worse. There would be more challenges, more choices that would break her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But she was ready. She had no choice but to be. And in this world, that was the only way to survive. In this gripping narrative, dive deep into a world of betrayal, power, and romance stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Follow the journey of Jasmine, a young woman who rises through the ranks of a dangerous empire, facing tough choices and unexpected twists. As she navigates the murky waters of loyalty and power, her path intertwines with Dante, a man who commands respect but also tests her boundaries. Romance stories often explore love in its many forms, but this one takes a different turn, showing the darker side of loyalty and betrayal. Will Jasmine maintain her humanity in the face of ruthless decisions, or will she become another pawn in the game of power? Every chapter unfolds a new layer, making this a perfect addition for fans of romance stories with an edge. As Jasmine's life spirals into uncertainty, the cost of survival in a world ruled by fear and trust becomes ever more apparent. Will she choose love or power, or is there room for both in a world so unforgiving? These romance stories explore the complexities of relationships, showing that sometimes the most complicated love stories are the ones written in the shadows. Join Jasmine on her journey as she learns the hard truths of loyalty and survival in a world that doesn't show mercy. In a world like this, where survival is a matter of life and death, what would you choose? Will you side with the power that Dante holds, or will your heart lead you down a different path, just like in the best of romance stories?